I was a Mossad agent operating deep inside the Sahara, where silence can drive a man insane. My mission was simple: find the truth. But what I uncovered beneath the dunes still follows me in my sleep. I remember the coordinates as if they are etched into my mind, though they are nothing more than a blur on the classified map now. The location was deep in the Sahara, miles away from any known civilization, a part of the world where few men tread and fewer return. The operation, classified under the code name Operation Desert Viper, began in total silence. No one was prepared for the truth of what lay hidden beneath the sand. The wind howled through the desert, whipping fine grains of sand into our faces as we trudged through the suffocating heat. My team and I, clad in black tactical gear, moved with precision. The humidity was relentless, and the heat seemed to twist the very air into a mirage, distorting our vision. Yet, despite the environmental pressures, we remained focused on the mission at hand. My role was clear: gather intel on an underground facility suspected to house advanced, possibly forbidden, military technology. A location isolated from the world for decades, kept from public eyes by governments that had forgotten it, or chosen to forget it. We were 5 men, all handpicked by Mossad for this mission: 2 demolition experts, a communication specialist, a medic, and me, the team leader. Our task was simple: infiltrate, secure what intelligence we could, and return. At least, that was the plan. But as we moved deeper into the desert, something seemed wrong. It was not just the heat or the vastness of the landscape. It was a sensation I could not shake. The feeling that something else was watching us, waiting just beyond the reach of our perception. At times, I could almost feel its presence, like a pulse in the back of my mind. Something ancient, something vast. And at the time, I had no idea how profoundly that sensation would alter everything. The mission briefing had been precise, sterile, and unnerving in its lack of detail. The facility we were tasked to investigate was located in the heart of the Sahara, hidden beneath miles of shifting sand dunes. Satellite images had detected abnormal readings, high-frequency radiation, electromagnetic anomalies that led us to this secretive location. The mission was critical, both for Israel's interests and the larger balance of power in the region. There were rumors of a lost Soviet installation, abandoned since the 1960s, filled with experimental technology that could change the tide of the Cold War. It could not be ignored. My team's purpose was simple: retrieve intelligence on the location, assess the technology, and if necessary, neutralize any threats that stood in our way. The desert, however, was the least of our concerns. The real danger lay beneath it, in the shadows where the world's forgotten secrets festered. We were operating outside of official channels with no direct support, and the knowledge that if something went wrong, no one would come looking for us. The temperature beneath the sun was unbearable, reaching 110-degree warmth during the day, and the air was thick with dust. Visibility was poor, yet we were well equipped for the environment. Each of us carried the standard Mossad issue: M1 Garand rifles, encrypted comms gear, personal water filtration systems, and survival packs for the extended operation. Our respirators filtered the dust, but even then, breathing felt like inhaling fire. The stakes were higher than most of us realized. What we were dealing with was not just another covert mission. Intelligence had suggested that this facility, long forgotten and presumed abandoned, held more than the average military tech. The Soviets had been conducting experiments here, unsanctioned, strange, even by their standards. The idea that this site might have been linked to paranormal phenomena was one we dismissed in the briefing as speculative. But the tension in the room told me that every one of us sensed the danger beneath the surface. As we set foot in the desert, I knew that the real mission wasn't just to secure intel, it was to prevent something far more catastrophic. My mind raced with the implications of what we could find down there. And for the first time in my career, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't the hunters in this desert. We moved through the sand as one, 5 men in the arid wasteland, each of us carrying the weight of our training and purpose. The heat was unrelenting, but the weight of our gear kept us focused. Each member of the team brought something essential to the operation: and each would soon face something beyond their training, something none of us could predict. First, there was Lieutenant Rachel Mizrahi, our medic. She was calm, level-headed, with a mind as sharp as a scalpel. Mizrahi's background in emergency trauma and bioengineering made her invaluable, but it was her instinct to remain composed under pressure that had earned her a place on this mission. Rachel was the one we'd rely on when things went wrong, when people got hurt, or worse, when sanity itself began to unravel. But she didn't know what she was truly walking into. No one did. Her quiet nature disguised the fact that she carried a well of strength, and that strength would be tested soon enough. Then there was Amir Hakim, our demolitions expert. He was reckless, confident, with a razor-sharp wit that could cut through the tension of any situation. Hakim had the reputation of getting things done, no matter the cost. A former IDF officer, he'd joined Mossad with a skill set few others could match. His expertise wasn't just in explosives. He could disable any device or trap with a steady hand and a focused mind. But beneath that hard exterior was a man who, for all his bravado, was deeply afraid of the unknown. That fear would eventually manifest in ways none of us could have foreseen. The comms specialist was Yara Klein, a genius with a talent for breaking codes and ensuring our signals remained encrypted, even in the most remote of locations. Yara had a cool, analytical nature, a mind built for puzzles. We relied on her to ensure our communications never failed, our transmission lines never compromised. Yet, what we didn't know was how deeply her gift would become a curse. Yara would eventually find herself not just decoding signals, but transmitting them. Strange, otherworldly signals that would begin to take root inside her mind. Lastly, there was Yossi Avrahami, the veteran. His experience in the field was unparalleled. A calm, seasoned leader with decades of service behind him, Yossi was the glue that held us all together. His voice was steady in the chaos, his decisions sharp even in the most uncertain of times. But as the operation progressed, something inside him began to fracture. His memories would slip, his awareness fading at times, until he became something other than what we had known. But for now, Yossi was the backbone of the operation, a quiet strength we all depended on. And then there was me, the team leader, tasked with ensuring the success of the mission. I was the one who held it all together, or so I thought. My mind, my resolve, had been honed through years of operations. But this mission, this desert, would break me in ways I was not prepared for. We moved toward the target in a tense, disciplined silence, our gear shifting and scraping against the desert floor. Each of us had a role to play. Each of us was prepared for the dangers the desert could throw at us. But the real threat was not the sandstorm, nor the intense heat, nor the isolation. It was something far darker. And in just a few hours, our training would no longer be enough. We assembled in a nondescript room deep within the safe house, our temporary command center. The walls were a dull gray, lit by the stark fluorescent lights overhead. A digital map projected on the screen in front of us showed a pinpoint location, buried deep beneath the shifting dunes of the Sahara. The coordinates were marked in red, yet they might as well have been a foreign language to us, unfamiliar and filled with a sense of dread we couldn't articulate. Colonel Levi, our commanding officer, stood at the front of the room, his expression grim, his eyes dark with the burden of the mission. "Operation Desert Viper is a go," Colonel Levi said in his usual monotone, his voice cutting through the thick air. "You are being inserted into a critical, high-priority location. Satellite imagery confirms the presence of an unknown underground facility. Intelligence suggests that it was Soviet in origin, a relic of their covert operations during the Cold War. But what's important now is that we can no longer ignore the data. Abnormal radiation levels have been detected near the site, alongside electromagnetic fluctuations." He paused for a moment, as if weighing the implications of his words. The room was eerily silent, the only sound the soft hum of the generator powering the safe house. "Your objective is simple. Infiltrate, retrieve any intelligence on the nature of the site, and return. If you encounter resistance, neutralize it. Be advised, the terrain is hostile, the environment unforgiving. You will be cut off from any external support. Extraction will be via helicopter once the operation is complete, but that will depend on your success. Colonel Levi's gaze swept over each of us, lingering a moment longer on Yossi, as though searching for any hint of hesitation. There was none. There could be none. This was a mission unlike any other. We were operating in the dark, under the guise of a routine reconnaissance mission, but there was nothing routine about it. The further we went, the more I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. The local area is barren, Levi continued. No civilian activity, no known military presence. However, the proximity to the site has raised concerns. We suspect that something else is at play, something we're not being told. Mizrahi, the medic, shifted in her seat, her voice low. Are we being briefed on the full extent of the site? I mean, the Soviets weren't just dealing with military tech. We're talking about years of research into experimental devices, possibly paranormal studies. What if they were doing something beyond weapons development? Levi's eyes narrowed slightly. We are not here to speculate, Mizrahi. Our orders are clear. Retrieve the information. If you encounter anything abnormal, report it. Do not engage unless necessary. He turned to the digital map behind him, tapping a few buttons to zoom in on the coordinates. This is where you will land. The map flickered momentarily, showing a blacked-out area with no further details. Like a void, a space left intentionally blank. Our gear was already set. We had everything we would need: night vision goggles, encrypted radios, portable oxygen tanks, and survival kits. Standard procedure for this type of operation. Yet I could feel the unease rising among my team. It wasn't the physical gear we needed to prepare for. It was something else. Something in the air, in the weight of the silence that surrounded us. Yara Klein was already checking her communication systems, her fingers moving across her console with practiced ease. I'm getting some interference on the signal, she murmured, her brow furrowed. It could be the terrain or the radiation levels we're seeing. It's inconsistent. I'll have to run a full diagnostics once we're closer. I'll handle any anomalies, Amir Hakim said, his voice sharp and full of bravado. Anything goes wrong, I'll have it neutralized before you can blink. Mizrahi, ever the calm presence, adjusted her medical kit and checked the oxygen levels. I've done the readings on the air quality out there. If the winds kick up, the sandstorms will be our biggest problem. Keep your masks on and stay hydrated. I took a moment to glance at each member of my team. They were prepared, yes, but I could sense the underlying tension in their posture. We all knew that a mission like this was not about the terrain or the tech. We were going into the unknown, and that's where things had a tendency to spiral. Move out in 30, Colonel Levi said, his tone final, his gaze unwavering. Stay focused. Stay sharp. We filed out of the room and headed to the transport vehicles, the weight of the desert's isolation pressing in on us with every step. The helicopters were already prepped, their engines humming to life as we climbed into the transports. I could feel the vibration beneath my feet as we took off, the sound of the rotors cutting through the thick desert air. As we ascended, the desert below us seemed to stretch forever, an endless sea of sand with no life in sight. But in that expanse, beneath the dunes, something waited. I couldn't tell you what it was, but I felt it. The sensation that something far older, far darker, was calling to us from beneath the earth. The helicopter shuddered as it banked left, and I glanced back toward the safe house, now just a small speck in the distance. The wind howled, the desert swallowed it, and we flew into the heart of the unknown. The helicopter flew low over the sand, the engine's roar a constant backdrop to the isolation below. The world beneath us was nothing but an endless ocean of golden dunes, stretching far beyond the horizon, distorted by the heat rising from the earth. There were no landmarks, nothing to mark the passing of time or distance. The air inside the cabin felt thin, as if it were being sucked away by the heat outside. Every breath we took felt like we were pulling the life out of us, and the tension was building, palpable in the heavy silence between us. Amir was the first to break the quiet. You ever wonder what the hell we're really walking into? His voice was light, almost careless, but there was an edge to it, a tremor that betrayed his anxiety. He leaned against the side of the chopper, his eyes scanning the empty, barren land below, as if trying to make sense of the vast nothingness. I didn't answer immediately. There was no point in speculating. The mission had been laid out for us, clear and simple. We were to find, secure, and return. The location was supposedly a Soviet installation, abandoned for years, no threat, or so we had been told. Yara was focused on her equipment, the soft glow of the readouts illuminating her face in the dim cabin light. "I've been running diagnostics on the communications," she muttered, her voice sharp. "Everything checks out for now, but we're nearing the site. I'm expecting more interference. We should be prepared for anything, even if we lose signal." I gave her a quick nod, my gaze drifting back to the horizon. In the distance, the heat shimmered, warping the air like a living thing. The GPS readouts were flickering erratically, and the further we flew, the more erratic the data seemed to get. It was subtle at first, nothing we couldn't explain as technical malfunctions. But the longer we flew, the more I felt a creeping unease. Yossi sat silently beside me, his face unreadable, but his eyes darted back and forth, scanning the land with an intensity I hadn't seen in him before. There was no doubt in my mind. He felt it too. There was something about the isolation of this place that gnawed at you, slowly at first, until it became all-consuming. The mission had started, but I could already feel the tension coiling like a spring inside me. The helicopter pitched slightly, the sudden motion causing the sandstorm to appear like a distant thundercloud, a line of darkened air, churning and shifting with unnatural speed. I had been expecting the winds, but this felt wrong. Even from the distance, it looked like something far more dangerous than just a storm. "Keep steady," I ordered, watching as the chopper pilot adjusted the altitude. "We're approaching the coordinates." Amir let out a low whistle, peering out over the edge of the helicopter. "That looks like one hell of a dust storm. What if it's covering something? A trap, maybe?" "It's not a trap," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure of that myself. The unease from before had turned into something more tangible. There was something about the storm that wasn't natural. Its speed, its intensity. It was moving too fast for any sandstorm I had ever seen. And that wasn't the only thing wrong with it. I glanced back at the others, but Yossi was staring intently at the dashboard, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping against the surface. Miriam, the medic, had her eyes closed, her breathing slow and controlled, but even she seemed to feel the creeping dread of the desert. "We're too close to turn back," I muttered to myself, but I knew it wasn't just the proximity to the target. It was something in the air, something that had begun to settle over us. The mission wasn't just about securing the site anymore. It felt like we were heading straight into the jaws of something ancient and waiting. The helicopter began its descent, the sandstorm rising up to meet us. It felt like we were flying into the mouth of a massive beast, the winds howling around us like some primal scream. For a split second, everything outside the helicopter was lost to the storm, the vast desert, the infinite horizon, until we broke through the dust and the storm parted like a veil. What lay ahead was not what I had expected. The landscape had changed, no longer just dunes, but something else. A jagged ridge of rock, ancient and craggy, loomed ahead. Nestled within it was the darkened entrance to a facility, half hidden beneath layers of sand and stone. It was an anomaly in the desert, something man-made, yet so out of place against the raw, natural backdrop of the Sahara. The chopper's rotors kicked up dust as we landed. The ground beneath us was solid, hard, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach wasn't. Something was wrong. The air was thick with static, a hum that seemed to come from the earth itself, vibrating through the floor of the helicopter. It was unsettling, unnatural. I turned to the team as the chopper touched down, the wind howling outside, rattling the aircraft. "Stay sharp," I said, my voice carrying more weight than I intended. "This isn't a standard operation. We don't know what we're dealing with here. Get in, get the intel, and get out." We disembarked quickly, our boots crunching into the sand as we moved toward the dark entrance of the facility. I couldn't shake the sensation that the sand itself was alive, as though it was shifting underfoot, watching, waiting. It was as if the earth was drawing us into it, beckoning us forward or perhaps swallowing us whole. As we reached the entrance, I glanced up at the craggy rock face above. The shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, bending in directions they shouldn't have. My hand instinctively moved toward my weapon, though I didn't know why. There was nothing out of the ordinary, at least not yet. But deep down, I knew this was no ordinary mission. This was the beginning of something I would never be able to forget. The entrance to the facility stood before us, partially obscured by shifting sands. A vast steel door, weathered and rusted by time, loomed like an ancient sentinel. It was cracked, as if something immense had once tried to break through it, yet failed. The air around it felt colder, heavier, almost as if the structure itself exhaled some forgotten breath. A chill ran down my spine. We were stepping into something that should have been left undisturbed, and the ominous silence of the desert felt like a warning we had ignored. Amir stepped forward, eager to breach the door with his usual precision, though the apprehension in his eyes betrayed his bravado. He worked quickly, pulling out the gear, placing the explosives with a quiet mutter under his breath. The sandstorm had whipped up as we approached, but the gusts were dying down, leaving an unnerving stillness in their wake. Even the winds had stopped. The only sound was the faint hum that seemed to rise from the depths of the facility, something we could all feel but none of us could explain. 5 seconds, Amir murmured, his eyes scanning the surroundings nervously. Let's see what's behind door number 1. His hands worked swiftly, and with a soft, controlled explosion, the door splintered, revealing a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch deeper into the bowels of the earth. The metallic smell of rust and decay flooded the air as the door fell inward, the sound echoing ominously down the hallway. I motioned for the team to follow. We moved in as a unit, our footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. The corridor was narrow, winding, as if the walls themselves had been constructed to disorient and confuse. The temperature was dropping with every step, the air growing more stagnant, more oppressive. Something felt off. It wasn't just the facility's eerie quiet. It was the sensation of being enclosed, of being watched. Yara's voice broke the silence, low and strained. I'm losing the signal. She sounded frustrated, her fingers dancing over the comms unit, trying to tune it. We're in a dead zone. I can't get a clear read on the system. Whatever's down here is interfering with everything. I nodded, trying to push the unease creeping up my spine into the background. Keep trying. We'll move deeper and try to get a better vantage point. We continued down the hallway, the passage getting narrower, the temperature continuing to drop. The lights above flickered sporadically, casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe across the walls. There were symbols etched into the walls, strange, unrecognizable glyphs that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Every time I thought I could make out their meaning, they shifted, just out of focus, like the symbols themselves were alive, changing with the light. Take a picture of this, I muttered to Yara, though she was already stepping forward, her camera out, snapping pictures of the symbols. Her eyes were wide, though she didn't speak. She didn't need to. We all felt it. There was something ancient and unnatural about this place, something that didn't belong in any time we knew. As we moved deeper, the corridors seemed to change. At first they were cold and sterile, with walls of steel and concrete, but the further we went, the more the environment seemed to warp. The walls became uneven, their surfaces slick, as if the very structure of the facility was buckling under some unseen pressure. It felt like we were walking inside the belly of something vast, alive, and it was squeezing in on us. Amir cursed under his breath as he glanced at his watch. Time's moving weird. The chrono's off. We've been walking for 10 minutes, but it feels like we've been here for hours. I didn't respond immediately. The sensation was growing stronger, like the fabric of time itself was unraveling. The air tasted strange now, metallic and bitter, the taste of something ancient, something beyond the reach of human understanding. My chest tightened. The hum was louder now, almost deafening, but it was more than just a noise. It was in us, vibrating in our bones, making our teeth ache. Then we heard it. The faint sound of chanting, distant, but distinct. It was low at first, like a whisper caught in the wind, but it grew louder, more distinct. echoing from somewhere deep within the facility. The rhythm was unsettling, slow, deliberate, as if it was calling us, beckoning us toward the heart of the building. I signaled for the team to halt. "Everyone stay sharp," I muttered, my voice low but firm. "We're not alone down here." Miriam's eyes narrowed and she muttered something under her breath, her hand instinctively moving to her medkit. But she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The oppressive silence, the chanting, everything about this place was wrong. "We need to find the source of that noise," I said, though the words sounded hollow in the air. The chanting was growing louder, but as it did, it began to shift, changing in tone, becoming less like an invitation and more like a command. The walls around us seemed to pulse, the concrete shifting beneath our feet, as if the structure itself was reacting to the sound. The hallway ahead opened up into a large chamber, and I felt it before I saw it. The pressure in the air grew unbearable. The shadows seemed to warp and move, stretching unnaturally along the walls like they were alive. The chamber was massive, but the air was thick, suffocating, as if the space itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows. It was fleeting, too quick for me to focus on, but it was enough to send a wave of nausea through my gut. I spun toward the source, but whatever had been there was already gone. The chanting stopped abruptly, leaving only the hum. It was now so loud that it seemed to drown out all other sound. The shadows on the walls grew longer, darker, reaching toward us like fingers outstretched from some dark, forgotten place. "We need to get out," I said, my voice shaking, but no one moved. The chamber seemed to close in on us, the very air alive with tension. I could feel the weight of it, the weight of the desert's secret, the weight of something ancient that had been waiting for us to stumble upon it. We pressed forward, our boots heavy against the unnatural silence, the air thick and oppressive. The deeper we went, the more the facility seemed to distort reality itself. The walls, once smooth and industrial, now appeared to be breathing, pulsing, rippling, as though the stone and metal were not inert, but somehow alive. The further we descended, the stronger the pull, like we were being drawn into the earth's core, like a giant, ancient entity was waiting for us to enter its maw. Amir, usually the first to crack a joke in tense situations, was quiet now. His eyes kept darting to the walls, the floor, searching for something, anything, to explain the distortion he was feeling. I could hear his breath coming in shallow gasps, the usual bravado gone. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath, though none of us were willing to admit it aloud. Yara was already scanning her equipment. Her fingers flew over her comms device, adjusting settings, trying to get a clear signal. The more she fiddled with her controls, the more frustrated she became. "This place, it's interfering with everything. The system keeps resetting." Her voice had an edge of panic to it, though she kept her focus. I had never heard her sound like that before. Yara was always the steady one, the one who kept us grounded when the world spun out of control. But here, she seemed lost. We entered what appeared to be the central hub of the facility, an open chamber with high vaulted ceilings that loomed above us, shrouded in shadows. The walls were etched with the same strange symbols we had seen earlier, but here they were more prominent, glowing faintly with an ethereal light. They pulsed, as though responding to the very presence of our team. I could feel the air crackle with energy, a low hum vibrating through the floor beneath us. The room seemed to stretch beyond the limits of the facility, impossible dimensions warping the space around us. The shadows on the walls shifted unnaturally, their edges flickering like flames, and the hum deepened, filling the chamber with a suffocating resonance. It felt like the walls were breathing in unison with us, pushing in on us with every breath we took. I motioned for the team to spread out, though I could feel the unease gathering at the back of my throat. The facility should have been abandoned, sterile, cold, and devoid of any life. But there was something alive about it. Something in the way the air tasted, the way the shadows twisted, that made it feel more like a living organism than a building. "We need to take a look at the central control," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yara, see if you can get any readings from the system. Amir, check for any signs of recent activity." The rest of you, keep alert. Something isn't right." We moved through the central chamber, each of us scanning the surroundings. The control panel in the center of the room seemed to have been untouched for years, yet it hummed with energy. It was as if the facility had been waiting for us, prepared for our intrusion. Yara stepped forward, fingers hovering over the console, her eyes flicking back to the team, her unease growing by the second. "I'm not sure," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm seeing readings that shouldn't be possible. The power levels, they're off the charts. And this." She turned toward us, holding up a small device she had pulled from the panel. "This is a data storage unit, but I've never seen anything like it. It's not human tech, it's wrong." The device hummed in her hand, glowing faintly with a blue light that pulsed rhythmically. The air seemed to shimmer around it, warping the space around us. I watched her closely, but there was something in her eyes now. A flicker of fear she wasn't hiding. This wasn't just a mission anymore. We were standing on the precipice of something we couldn't control. "I don't like this," Amir said, his voice low. His hands were trembling slightly, his usual cocky demeanor long gone. "I don't care what's down here, I'm starting to think we should leave. This place, it's not right." I turned to face him, my own nerves beginning to fray. "We're not leaving without intel. Keep it together. We move forward. We finish the job." But deep down, I knew he was right. Something had shifted. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a covert operation anymore. We were intruders in a place that was never meant to be found. The facility wasn't just a relic, it was a prison, a tomb. We continued our investigation, but the longer we stayed, the worse it felt. The temperature in the room had dropped drastically, the cold settling into our bones, turning our breath to mist. The walls groaned, a low, almost imperceptible noise, as if the building itself was alive, shifting, preparing to do something we couldn't understand. I reached for my radio, but the signal was gone. It had been cut off, again. We were truly alone. And whatever was here, whatever had waited for us, it was about to make itself known. The air in the facility thickened, and the cold sank deeper into our bodies, like it was seeping through the layers of our uniforms. I could feel it at the back of my neck, a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something was watching us, waiting. There was a stillness to the room that made my every movement feel too loud, too deliberate. My boots scraped across the floor, the sound unnervingly amplified in the oppressive silence. Amir was the first to break the tension. He had been examining the walls, running his fingers over the strange symbols that flickered dimly, their glow pulsing as though they were alive. "This isn't just old tech," he muttered under his breath. "These markings are part of something else. It's not just radiation interference, and this feels like it's alive." I stepped closer to him, glancing at the symbols. They seemed to change as I looked at them, shifting imperceptibly, like they were teasing the edge of my perception. It was as though the walls were bending, the light bending with them. But just as quickly as the thought formed, it faded. I shook my head. I was letting the tension get to me. The mission was clear. "Yara," I said, my voice steady despite the growing unease. "Check the data we've collected. See if you can pull something useful from it. Amir, make sure there's no movement outside this room. We need to secure our position before we move deeper." Yara nodded silently, her fingers already dancing over the controls. The sound of her breathing, shallow and quick, was the only noise that cut through the thick air. I could feel her unease, though she tried to hide it, just like the rest of us. Suddenly, a loud crack split the silence. It came from somewhere behind us, deep within the labyrinthine corridors we had just passed through. I turned instinctively, my hand snapping to the rifle at my side. My team followed suit, weapons raised, the tension thickening around us. "What the hell was that?" Amir whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes scanned the shadows, but there was nothing that would explain the sudden, sharp sound. No footsteps, no distant clanging, just that one, ominous crack. "Stay alert," I ordered, though the words felt hollow even as they left my mouth. "It could be nothing. Keep moving." We advanced cautiously, every step calculated, every sound amplified in the stillness. The further we moved, the colder it became. The air felt heavy, as though it were pressing down on us, unwilling to let us go. The soft hum we had felt earlier in the facility intensified, now vibrating in our chests, making the air seem thicker, more difficult to breathe. It was as if the facility itself was pulling us in. As we reached the next corridor, I noticed something strange. The floor ahead seemed to shift, as though it were no longer flat. A faint shimmer, like heat rising from the sand on a hot day, distorted the air just beyond the next corner. The shimmer wasn't natural. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. I paused, signaling for the team to stop. My heart began to race. I could feel the pulse of someone, moving ahead of us, in the shadows. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't the only one who felt the presence. The others were already tense, their eyes darting back and forth, their fingers tight on the triggers of their weapons. We were not alone. "Wait," I whispered, and my voice felt like a violation of the silence, an echo too loud in the stillness. "Listen." For a moment, there was only the sound of our breathing. Then, it came again, a soft hiss, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Footsteps that didn't quite sound human, too light, too deliberate. They seemed to echo from every direction, growing louder and faster, yet when I turned, I saw nothing. Yara's hand trembled on her comms device. "Something's messing with my equipment. I can't get a lock on anything." She tried to steady herself, but the look in her eyes was wide with panic. "Yara," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Focus. Whatever it is, we can't let it." Before I could finish, a figure flickered in the corner of my vision, just at the edge of the hallway. A pale shape, humanoid, standing perfectly still. It wasn't moving, but it was there. It was watching us. I turned, but the figure was gone before I could react. "Did anyone else see that?" My voice cracked as I asked, though I already knew the answer. They had seen it too. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale as they scanned the area. "We need to get out of here," Amir whispered, his voice tight. "This isn't right. We're not alone." I motioned for him to stay quiet. "We're staying on mission. Keep moving." We pressed on, though each of us felt the invisible eyes on us, their presence growing heavier with every step. The walls closed in. The air grew thicker, more suffocating. The faintest sound of that hiss returned, but now it was mixed with a low, guttural growl, as if something was calling to us, beckoning us further into the bowels of the facility. We reached another junction, the hall splitting into 3 directions. The noise, the growl, was louder now, coming from the far right. But that wasn't the only thing we noticed. The floor beneath us was cracked, the cement visibly shifting, and from within the cracks, a faint glow emanated. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. Miriam, always the calmest under pressure, took a hesitant step forward, then stopped. "There's something in the walls," she said, her voice low but certain. "It's alive. This place, it's not just abandoned. It's waiting for something." "We're not leaving without the intel," I said through clenched teeth, but even I could hear the fear that had crept into my voice. This was no longer just a mission. It was a test of something else, something far darker than we had been prepared for. The glow from the floor brightened, pulsing faster now, as the growl deepened into something else, something that sounded too much like a whisper. The voice called my name. The voice that called my name was not human. It echoed through the chamber, distant yet intimate, as though it had come from within me. The air thickened around us, the walls breathing louder with every second. The growling, the hissing, the whispering. It was all melding together, a cacophony that was now in the room, on us, suffocating us. "Cohen, you must come." The voice was layered, twisting in my head, shifting like static on an old radio, the words incomplete, fragmenting. My body froze in place, as though the sound had tethered me to the floor. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Yara, her face ashen, stepped back, her hand trembling as she reached for her comms device. I'm not picking up anything." The interference is overwhelming." Her voice was a strangled whisper, and I saw the fear creeping into her eyes, an emotion I had never seen in her before. This wasn't a simple comms issue. There was something else at play here, something far darker than we had been prepared to handle. Amir took a sharp breath and stepped forward, his rifle raised, his eyes scanning the shadows. "What the hell is that? What's calling to us?" His voice was ragged, the bravado long gone. He was no longer the cocky demolitions expert. He was a soldier trapped in a nightmare, and all the training in the world couldn't help him now. The shadows shifted again, longer, darker, impossibly more defined. They stretched across the walls, unnaturally, as though they were reaching toward us, like they were aware of our presence. I could see them flickering, moving, warping in and out of sight. At first, they were just dark spots in the corners of the room, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw them for what they were. Figures, humanoid, twisted and elongated. "Back!" I shouted, but my voice was drowned out by the rising hum, the thrum in the air, a vibration that rattled the bones. The floor beneath our feet trembled. The figures in the shadows began to emerge, slowly, deliberately, moving toward us. Their limbs were too long, their bodies too thin, and their faces, if they could be called faces, were featureless, pale masks with hollow eyes. They were not human. They were something else, something ancient. And they were walking toward us. "We need to move!" I barked, my heart pounding in my chest. My training kicked in, but it wasn't enough. It was like running in a dream, every step slower than the last, the weight of the air pushing against us. The shadows were closing in. The figures were getting closer. They were almost upon us. But then, the first flicker happened. Amir jerked back, his rifle raised, firing blindly into the shadows. The gunfire echoed, but it did nothing. The figures didn't flinch. They didn't even react. Instead, the shadows twisted, contracting around him like a living thing, wrapping around his legs, pulling him toward the ground. I lunged toward him, but my hand passed through him, as though he were made of mist. The look in his eyes told me he wasn't there anymore. He had already begun to fade, to unravel, to become one with whatever force these things represented. "Amir!" Miriam screamed, her voice breaking. She rushed to his side, but it was too late. The shadows enveloped him entirely, pulling him into the walls. His body twisted, contorted, before vanishing into the dark, the last thing visible his terrified eyes, wide and pleading before they disappeared completely. A sickening silence followed. My mind couldn't process what had just happened. He had been there, one moment, a solid, living person, and now he was gone, consumed by the very thing we had come to investigate. The shadows continued to move, but they no longer seemed interested in us. They receded into the walls, leaving a thick, suffocating air that tasted like metal and decay. "We have to go," I said, my voice hoarse, my hands trembling. But my legs wouldn't move. The shadows, no, the space, was pressing in on us, suffocating us, pulling at our minds, distorting everything around us. The walls were warping, the floor shifting beneath our feet. Time itself was bending. "Cohen," Miriam whispered, her voice trembling. Her hands were shaking as she gripped her medkit, the tools inside rattling like they had a mind of their own. She was staring at something I couldn't see, her eyes wide with terror. "Look at the walls." I turned toward her, my heart in my throat. The walls. They were moving. The symbols were no longer static. They were alive. They rippled like a living organism, stretching, contorting, folding in on themselves. It wasn't just the walls, though. The entire room seemed to pulse with life, as though it were breathing with us. "We need to leave now," Yossi shouted, his voice a roar, but his words seemed to be swallowed by the hum of the space. It felt as if the very air was closing in around us, the vibrations in the walls growing deeper, more intense until they rattled our bones. I felt the air grow colder again, colder than before. The very temperature of the room had dropped, and my breath turned to mist in front of me. My fingers went numb, and I could hear the faint call again, that whispering voice, beckoning us, pulling us toward the center of the room. The walls weren't just breathing. The facility was alive. Suddenly, the floor beneath us cracked. A deep rumbling sound filled the air, like the entire facility was about to collapse in on itself. The cracks spread, and I could see the sand from the desert seeping through the fissures, creeping into the room, like the earth was slowly claiming us. It was all collapsing. "We have to move now," I shouted, but my voice barely cut through the chaos. Miriam was already turning, but the floor was buckling, the shadows moving, no longer just on the walls, but in the air, twisting around us, pulling at us, distorting our vision. My mind was struggling to comprehend it, to make sense of it, but there was no sense left to make. Time was bending, reality was bending, and we were being sucked into it. The air was thick with pressure, a weight that pressed down on my chest, making it harder to breathe with every passing second. We stumbled through the shifting hallways, but it felt like we were not moving, like the facility itself was moving, shifting, reshaping around us. The walls, now alive with those shifting symbols, seemed to close in, and the floor trembled beneath our feet, as though something far beneath us was awakening. I could feel it now. Really feel it. The entity. It was more than just an oppressive force. It wasn't just the temperature drop, or the shaking of the walls, or the whispers that had become a constant hum in the back of my skull. It was the presence, the awareness, that we weren't meant to be here. Something ancient was watching us, waiting for us to cross the line. And I could feel the line getting thinner with every step we took. "Cohen," Miriam's voice cut through the haze of dread, low and shaky. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, but there was something else in her gaze, something that seemed to be slipping away, like she was losing herself to something she couldn't understand. "We need to go. This isn't just a facility. It's a trap." I didn't argue. The very ground beneath us had begun to warp, distorting into strange, impossible angles. The walls weren't just moving. They were folding, pulling inward, bending space. Nothing made sense anymore. The hallway behind us, where we had just come from, was now impossibly long, its end nowhere to be seen. The hallway ahead was swallowed in a mass of darkness that stretched into the unknown, too vast, too unexplainable to comprehend. Then, from the depths of the darkness ahead, it emerged. At first it was a flicker, something I thought I saw, something that danced at the edge of my vision. But when I turned, nothing was there. I blinked, and there it was again. And this time, it wasn't in the shadows. It was the shadows, a moving mass that seemed to bleed out of the walls, shifting and twisting, pulling itself into the form of a figure. It was humanoid, but not. Its shape was wrong, too tall, too thin, its limbs stretched impossibly long, like a grotesque puppet. The face was featureless, a blank canvas that flickered with light, as if the very concept of a face couldn't stay solid. The only thing that defined it were the eyes, no, the gaze, a void of blackness that seemed to consume all light around it. It was watching us. It was always watching. It took a step forward, and the world seemed to lurch. The ground shifted beneath us, the walls groaning like the sound of 100 dead things waking at once. The air was saturated with that deep hum, but now, it was different. It wasn't just a noise, it was sounding in my head, vibrating through my skull, making the very thoughts I had feel wrong, like they weren't mine. "Everyone, get ready," I said, my voice shaking as I raised my weapon, though my hands were no longer steady. I didn't know why I bothered. The rifle felt useless now, as though the weapon in my hand was a thing of the past, not suited for what stood before us. Miriam was already backing away, her eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Cohen, what is that? What is it?" Her voice cracked, and for the first time I saw her completely undone by fear. "I don't know," I whispered, though I had never been more sure of anything in my life. "But it's real. We've been walking into its trap from the beginning." I could feel the floor tremble beneath us again, and the shadow, the entity, moved closer. Its limbs twisted unnaturally, too long, too fluid, like something pulled from the deepest nightmare. Its gaze never left us, those hollow eyes filled with a vast, unknowable hunger. "We need to leave. Now," Amir snapped, his voice frantic. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by sheer terror. He turned to run, but the shadows moved faster than any of us could react. The walls closed in on us, and just as Amir took a step, the shadows reached out. They wrapped around him. No, not just wrapped, but consumed. His form was pulled into the darkness with a horrible, inhuman scream that I can still hear in my mind, even now. His rifle clattered to the floor, but he was gone, swallowed whole by the very darkness we had been walking toward. "Amir!" Yara screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the shadows. The air around us crackled, a low hum vibrating through our bodies, making our bones ache. There was nothing we could do, nothing but watch as the shadows pulled Amir into the void. The entity moved again, its figure shifting, bending, its limbs twisting impossibly, and for a split second, I saw the truth behind it, a glimpse of the incomprehensible thing it truly was, something that should never be. The walls, the floor, the very space we were standing in bent and collapsed around us. Time was collapsing. It wasn't linear anymore. Nothing was in its right place. The hum was rising, vibrating through our bodies, through the very air itself, and everything was beginning to shatter. Our reality was beginning to shatter. The figure drew closer, its void of eyes now turning toward Yara. I watched in horror as her eyes glazed over, her body trembling. She whispered something incomprehensible, but her words were thick with the hum, heavy with a language I didn't recognize. The space around us started to warp, the shadows bleeding into the air, wrapping around us like some endless abyss. The weight of the thing behind us, it, pressed in, and then everything collapsed. The instant Amir was consumed by the darkness, everything fell apart. The very air around us seemed to bend and fracture. The walls, once solid and unyielding, were now folding, their seams stretching like flesh. We were no longer in a facility. We were trapped in a nightmare, an endless shifting maze of impossible geometry and distorted time. Yara was the first to react. Her hands, once steady and sure, were shaking violently as she looked at her comms device. It's changing everything," she gasped, her voice a fractured whisper. The device in her hand flickered wildly, the readings fluctuating in ways that made no sense. She raised her hand to her face, her expression blank, as though she were listening to something I couldn't hear. "Yara, stay with us," Miriam shouted, her voice full of panic. But Yara's gaze had shifted, her eyes no longer focused on the world around her. They were glazed over, distant, like she was somewhere else, somewhere beyond us. She turned slowly, her movements jerky, her fingers twitching at her sides. "It's not just here. It's everywhere," she murmured, her voice distant. "I can hear them, all of them. They're calling. The walls are talking, and we're part of it now." What the hell is happening to her? Amir's voice echoed in my mind, though the words were hollow, reverberating in the air like a strange echo. His body was gone, but his presence was still there, lingering in the shadows, in the hum of the walls. His words hung in the air, twisted, distorted, as if they had never truly been spoken by him. "Focus!" I commanded, my voice ragged, though I wasn't sure whether I was trying to pull myself together or keep everyone else together. The oppressive weight of the air was making it harder to think, harder to breathe. "Yara, respond. We need to move, now." But it was too late. Yara's eyes flicked back to me, but they were no longer hers. The look in them wasn't human. It was alien, something vast and incomprehensible. The edges of her form began to ripple, like her very essence was warping, bending out of shape, distorting as if she were becoming part of the fabric of this strange place. Her skin shifted under her suit, stretching unnaturally, like something crawling beneath the surface of her body. The air hummed louder now, vibrating against my bones, sending ripples through the walls. The shadows that had once been static were alive now, shifting constantly, twisting into forms that were never quite stable. Each flicker, each distortion, seemed to sap more of the reality from the space around us. "Miriam," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "get ready to extract." We're not leaving here the same way we came in. But Miriam was already on her knees, her hands pressing against the floor. She was staring at the symbols on the walls, her eyes wide with something close to horror. It's happening to me too, she said, her voice barely a sound. I feel it in my bones. It's inside me. I can't stop it. Her words faded as she fell silent. Slowly she rose, but something was wrong. Her movements were stilted, unnatural. She raised her hand to her face, her fingers twitching, trembling. Her eyes snapped to mine, but they were empty. Her pupils dilated, as if she no longer recognized me. It's happening. It's all happening, she whispered, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. I can feel it all. The others. They are reaching through. I didn't know how to respond, whether to speak, to run, to try and fight whatever was twisting our minds, our bodies, our very souls. Time had fractured, collapsed, around us. The walls seemed to breathe with a rhythm that wasn't natural, like the very structure of reality itself was being stretched and torn. Everything was wrong. Then it hit me. This was beyond physical space, beyond what we could see or touch. The facility was a gateway, a threshold, and the force behind it, the thing that had begun to awaken, wasn't just here in this place. It was using us, infecting us, rewriting our bodies and minds. Yossi, who had been silent since we entered, now looked up, his eyes hollow, distant. His voice when he spoke was foreign to me, as though it was coming from someone, or something, else entirely. We were never meant to leave, he said, his words distant and slow. This place is where time ends. Where we end, we will be here, with it, always. I didn't understand what he meant, but his eyes, those eyes, were not Yossi's. They were darker, deeper, filled with the same alien hunger that had consumed Amir. The shadows on the walls swirled around him like a cloak, merging with his form until he became one with the darkness, his shape flickering and fading. I reached for him, but my hand passed through his body, like a phantom. He was gone, dissolved into the darkness, absorbed into whatever ancient force had twisted the facility into something beyond recognition. I turned to Yara, who was still standing, her body trembling with the same unnatural energy. But she wasn't herself anymore. The being that stood before me, wearing her body like a skin, was no longer the woman I had known. Her fingers twitched, spasming, as she reached out toward me. The time is collapsing, she whispered, her voice now a mix of static and melody, as though the very sound of her speech was being ripped apart. We are all here, and you cannot escape. The door, it opens. We are the key. I backed away, my heart racing. I wanted to run, but the path forward was gone. The walls had collapsed, the floor was gone, and the air was now thick with a hum that reverberated in every cell of my body. I was trapped, and as I turned to the others, the shadows stretched toward me, their fingers becoming too real, too solid, pulling me toward them, bending time and space as if I were a puppet. The facility had become a tomb, and we were the prisoners inside it. The air in the facility had become dense, suffocating, and for a moment I thought I could no longer hear my own breath, only the hum, that deep, resonant frequency that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. It was no longer just a sound, but a sensation that crawled under my skin, vibrating through my bones. The walls seemed to shimmer, rippling as though they were fabric pulled tight over an unseen force. We were no longer inside a facility. We were within something far older, something beyond comprehension. The walls, the floors, the shadows, they weren't just part of the environment anymore. They were alive, aware, and they were closing in on us. The ground trembled underfoot, the tremors so intense they felt like the facility itself was shifting, expanding, folding into something else. Something beyond time and space. Cohen. Yara's voice was a low, guttural rasp, no longer her own. She was standing still, her arms outstretched, her body shaking violently as though something was inside her, trying to tear her apart. Her eyes had gone completely black, the pupils swallowed by an endless void, reflecting the distorted world around us. She wasn't human anymore. Whatever had taken over her was something ancient, far beyond anything we had prepared for. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows seemed to grow thicker around her, pulsating, swelling like they were feeding off her, merging with her body until she was no longer a figure, but part of the blackness itself. I could see her outline flickering, distorting, as though her form was being stretched across multiple dimensions at once. "We have to stop it," I whispered, but the words felt like they had no weight. This wasn't something we could stop. We were already part of it. The facility was no longer just a place. It was a doorway, a rift, and we were caught in its pull. Yossi's voice broke through the haze, distant and slow. He was standing far back, his body trembling as if he were resisting something. But his eyes were empty, his face drawn, his features twisted in ways that weren't human anymore. "You don't understand," he rasped. "It's too late. It's already here. It was always here." The floor cracked beneath us, the sound of breaking concrete cutting through the air like thunder. I turned toward him, but it wasn't Yossi standing there anymore. The figure that had once been my teammate had merged with the shadows, his form dissolving into a black mist that seemed to stretch across the room. I reached for my weapon, but it felt useless. There was no fighting this. There was no fighting it. The entity in the shadows began to move toward us, its form shifting in and out of focus, warping as it moved, as if it was composed of hundreds of broken images stitched together. It was towering, yet fluid, its limbs too long, too thin, and its body flickering between corporeal and ethereal. It was not one thing. It was everything. And yet, it was nothing. It raised one of its arms, or what I could only assume was an arm, and the air around us seemed to bend in response, warping, twisting, like the very fabric of reality was being torn open. Time itself stuttered. The walls folded in on themselves, and the very ground beneath us buckled, shifting as though it were alive, pushing us deeper into the earth. I couldn't tell if the entity was speaking or if it was just in my mind. It didn't need words. The feeling was enough. It was in everything. In the air, in the walls, in the shadows. The voice or the presence, or whatever it was, echoed through my thoughts, pulling at my sanity, stretching it thin. It doesn't need us to understand. It only needs us to exist. The shadows on the walls turned into shapes, figures, memories, visions, of people who weren't real, of things I couldn't explain. They moved in and out of focus, their faces stretched in ways that were wrong, unnatural. They were calling my name, all of them. Their voices layered on top of each other until I could no longer distinguish who was real and who was part of the hallucination. "Run!" Miriam screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. But it was too late. The very walls closed in, the ceiling lowering, the ground rising up. There was nowhere to go, no way out. The space was shrinking, collapsing, folding in on itself. Yara's body, still writhing in the shadows, stretched upward, her form becoming a grotesque mixture of light and dark, twisted and malformed. The entity, if it could be called that, wrapped itself around her, its presence becoming a suffocating mass that threatened to consume everything. I reached for Miriam, pulling her back, but it was useless. We were caught. The pull was too strong. The walls, the floor, the very air around us was folding inward, becoming one with the entity. There was no escape. The facility had become a trap, a doorway to a realm that no human was meant to enter, a place where time and space had no meaning, where reality was fluid and broken. "We're all part of it now," Miriam said, her voice breaking, her face pale as she looked at me. This was never meant to be an escape. It was meant to trap us. As the last of the space folded around us, the shadowed entity, its tendrils reaching for us, my vision went black. There was no sound, no light, just an endless pull, dragging us further into the abyss. The darkness that swallowed us was not just an absence of light, it was a suffocating pressure, a weight that crushed down on my chest and forced the air from my lungs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My mind raced, scrambling to make sense of the cold, consuming void that surrounded us. But there was no sense left to make. The world had dissolved, time had twisted, and reality had shattered. It felt like an eternity, or maybe no time at all. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that the darkness wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something that seeped into the fabric of our beings, stripping away everything we had once known. I was aware of the others, of Miriam and Yara and Yossi and Amir, but they weren't fully there. Not in the way I needed them to be. They were fading, lost to the endless blackness, their forms flickering in and out of focus like broken images in a shattered mirror. Then, like a sudden jolt, I was aware of the world again. The oppressive weight was gone, the suffocating pressure lifted for a brief, agonizing moment. I gasped for air, but the sensation wasn't real. The air I was breathing tasted of metal, sharp and cold, like something had changed in the very atmosphere. The darkness was still there, but now it was everywhere. It surrounded me, seeping into my skin, into my bones. The walls, or whatever they were, felt as though they were alive, their surfaces pulsing with an unnatural energy, an energy that made the very ground beneath me tremble. I tried to move, but my legs felt weak, my body refusing to cooperate. Miriam's voice broke through the silence, her words distorted, as if coming from miles away. "Cohen," she called. But it was not her voice. It was something else, twisted, warped, like the very sound had been corrupted. She was somewhere in the darkness, but where? I couldn't see her. I couldn't see anything. Then, suddenly, I felt it. The pull. The presence that had been waiting, watching, moving around us like an ancient predator, its gaze heavy on the back of my neck. It was coming for us. It had always been coming for us, but now it was finally here, moving through the fabric of space and time like it had all the time in the world. It was patient. It had been waiting for us to stumble into its domain. And now, it would consume us. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking as I tried to push through the paralyzing dread that gripped me. I had to move. I had to escape. My fingers brushed against the walls, and the surface felt wrong, alive, writhing beneath my touch, as though it was part of the entity itself. A part of the vast, unspeakable force that had taken hold of this place. There was no way out. The walls were closing in, pressing on me from all sides. The sound of shifting grew louder, a deep rumble that shook the floor, the air vibrating with unnatural force. Time was bending again. I could feel it in my chest, the steady collapse of everything I had known. I turned, half blind, stumbling toward where I thought the exit might be. But nothing was familiar anymore. The hallway was gone. The corridor we had once walked through had been consumed, folded into an endless void. I reached for my comms device, but it was dead. No signal, no connection. The facility had swallowed everything, every shred of communication, every hope of escape. It was all part of the trap, part of the design. Then, I heard it. A crack, sharp and sudden, like thunder breaking in the distance. I turned toward it instinctively, my heart hammering in my chest, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the faintest outline of a door in the distance. A way out. A chance. I ran toward it, my feet barely touching the ground, each step heavy as though I were moving through thick, viscous air. The shadows reached for me, the floor beneath me warping and cracking with every stride, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't hesitate. The entity was right behind me, closing in, and if I stopped, I knew it would consume me completely. I reached the door, or what was left of it. The frame was barely visible, shrouded in darkness, but it was there. The door itself was a warped, fractured thing, no longer solid or real, but something pulled from the depths of the void. It hummed with a low, menacing energy, a doorway to something beyond the world I had once known. With one final, desperate breath, I pushed through, my body slamming against the door, and the world shattered. The world snapped back into focus, or at least I thought it had. My senses returned in a fractured rush. I was no longer in the facility. The crushing weight of the air, the oppressive darkness that had consumed us was gone. But the feeling, the sense that something was wrong, that I wasn't where I was supposed to be, remained. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the light, but it was dim and strange. The colors were off, the shadows stretching in ways that defied logic. It felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. I took a deep breath, but the air tasted strange, thick with something metallic, a bitter aftertaste that burned my throat. I reached up to touch my face, but the sensation wasn't right. My skin felt cold, too cold, like it wasn't my own. I looked down at my hands, but they were different. They were trembling, but not from fear. Something else. My fingers had lost their feeling, the joints stiff like they were no longer truly mine. I turned to look around me, but I could barely make sense of the space. The landscape stretched out before me in a surreal blur, like a twisted reflection of reality. It was too bright here, but the light didn't feel natural. It felt unnatural, like it was coming from everywhere at once, stretching out from the sky in colors that didn't belong. The ground beneath me was cracked, yet the cracks pulsed with a faint glow, like veins beneath a skin I couldn't touch. Miriam was beside me, or rather, a version of Miriam. Her face was pale, drawn, but her eyes, those eyes were wide and empty. She was staring at me, her gaze locked onto mine, but there was no recognition there, no humanity. Her body stood rigid, as if controlled by some unseen force. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice came out distorted, like I was hearing it through a broken radio. The words felt foreign, alien, and they didn't feel like my own. Miriam's lips moved, but the words didn't match the sound I heard. It was as if the voice that came out was someone else's entirely. "We are not here," she said, her voice warped, static-like. "We are part of it. We always have been." I took a step back, but my legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath me were not solid. I reached out to steady myself, but my hands passed through the air, through what I thought was reality, as though nothing had substance. The landscape rippled around me, the very ground beneath my feet warping and bending. It was as though we were standing on the edge of something that had no form, no boundary. "Cohen!" The voice came again, though it didn't come from Miriam. It was distant, hollow, as if it were coming from the air itself. I turned toward the sound, but there was nothing there. No figure, no shape, nothing but the strange alien sky and the distorted, fractured land. I glanced back at Yara, who was still standing next to me. She was in the same state as Miriam, her body present, but her eyes unfocused, distant. Her hands twitched, almost as if she were trying to grasp something that wasn't there. And her mouth moved, but the words that left it were no longer words at all. They were sounds, unfamiliar sounds, distorted and incomprehensible. The ground beneath us trembled, and I realized we were no longer where we had been. The facility, the walls, the shadows, it was all gone. We had crossed a boundary, and now we were somewhere else, some other place. I tried to scream, to shout, to get answers, but there was no sound. My mouth moved, but nothing came out. The world around us distorted again, like reality itself was folding in on itself, bending in impossible ways. The air shimmered, and suddenly, everything felt too far away. My body, my mind, felt disconnected, like I was existing in two places at once, but neither place was real. I was no longer me. None of us were. We were fragments, pieces of something that had once been whole, now scattered across a void. I turned to look at Yossi, hoping for something familiar, something to ground me. But his face, it was wrong. It was blank, empty, devoid of expression. His body stood rigid, frozen, like he had been turned to stone. But his eyes, they weren't his eyes. They were glassy, unfocused, like they were staring into a void. They were looking at me, but they weren't seeing me. "Yossi?" I whispered, but my voice faltered, lost in the alien space we were trapped in. There was no response. His body shifted, but only slightly, like he was moving in a slow, mechanical way, like something was pulling him from within. I reached out for him, but my hand passed right through his form, like I was trying to touch smoke. The sensation of distance, of being lost in some strange dimension, overwhelmed me. Everything was broken. The sky, the land, the air, the people, my team. They weren't real anymore. Not in the way I remembered them. I tried to focus, tried to piece together the reality that was slipping through my fingers, but it was all disintegrating. Time was no longer a constant. The ground beneath us buckled again, and suddenly there was a flash, a brief, terrible vision of the facility, of the shadows, of the entity that had started it all. And then, the flash was gone, replaced by the unsettling calm of this new world. We were no longer the people we had been. We had crossed into something else, something beyond comprehension. And what had been done to us? That, I couldn't explain. The truth of it all was slipping away, and with it, any hope of understanding. We were no longer human. We were something else entirely. The feeling of weightlessness lingered. The world around us seemed suspended, caught in a moment of time that stretched infinitely. There was no clear boundary between the strange, distorted space we found ourselves in and the memories that clung to us like remnants of a life long past. The reality we had once known had dissolved, fractured beyond recognition, and now we existed in a space that could not be mapped, a place that did not follow the rules of physics, logic, or anything human. I could not tell where I began and where this otherworldly thing ended. The others, the team, were with me, but not. They were echoes, husks, fading in and out of focus. I tried to speak, to cry out for help, but my voice was lost in the vastness of this place. I couldn't even be sure if I had a voice anymore. The air was thick with a pressure that made every movement feel wrong, like I was pushing through tar. The silence was unbearable, louder than any scream I had ever heard, a constant hum, buzzing just under the surface of my thoughts. Then, as if from nowhere, a sharp pop, the unmistakable sound of a door opening. I turned to see the sterile clinical white of a debriefing room, the stark, unfeeling lights overhead. The room was quiet, too quiet, and the moment I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me with an eerie finality. It was as though the world had decided it was done with me, done with all of us. I was no longer in the facility. I was no longer in the desert, or in that nightmare realm between worlds. I was here, in this sterile, empty room, facing an officer whose face I didn't recognize, but whose presence was somehow suffocatingly familiar. He was sitting behind a desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him, staring at me with a coldness I could not read. "You are being processed," the officer said, his voice flat and emotionless, as though it had been rehearsed 1,000 times. The words landed on me like bricks, too heavy, too sharp. I couldn't respond. The words wouldn't come. "You will not remember what happened," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "What happened to you, to your team, will be erased." "Erased?" I managed to choke out, my throat raw, as though I had not spoken in years. You can't just erase it." The officer's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. "It's standard procedure. The events of Operation Desert Viper were classified. You and your team were exposed to data that cannot be allowed to reach the public. The facility is to remain sealed. Your memories will be altered to ensure that the mission's true purpose is forgotten." I stood motionless, unable to process the words. The memories of the mission, of Amir, Yara, Miriam, and Yossi, flickered in my mind, images flashing too quickly to hold on to. The entity, the shadows, the whispers. It was all becoming hazy, like water slipping through my fingers. "You are to be reassigned," the officer continued, his voice cold and professional. "You will take part in another operation, another role that aligns with your altered status. All records of Desert Viper will be erased, including any knowledge of what occurred down there." A hollow feeling settled in my chest, deeper than any fear I had ever known. "Altered status?" I repeated, my voice shaking despite myself. "What do you mean? What happened to us?" The officer's gaze softened for the first time, but it was not in a reassuring way. It was clinical, detached. "You were exposed to forces you cannot comprehend. your memories, your identities. They are no longer intact. The alterations will ensure you remember only what you must remember. The rest will be suppressed. It is for the safety of everyone. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, the walls pressing in on me, as if the room itself was part of the same process that was erasing my existence. My hands shook violently as I clutched the edge of the desk. "You don't understand," I whispered. "You don't understand what we saw, what we became." But the officer didn't respond. He didn't need to. The process was already underway. The world blurred again, the lines between reality and that dark, twisted place beginning to disintegrate. I tried to scream, tried to claw at the fragments of my mind, but there was nothing I could hold on to. The room began to fade, its edges dissolving, the officer's face becoming a smear of shadows. A cold mechanical voice echoed in the space, too loud in the empty room. "Memories will be suppressed, truth will be erased, operation complete." I awoke in my quarters, an apartment I barely recognized, a room that had somehow become my new reality. The sterile, clinical surroundings were a cruel reminder of the life I had left behind, or the life I thought I had left behind. My mind was foggy, hazy, like the memories of my past had been scraped clean, leaving only fragments behind, jagged and incomplete. I rose from the bed, my feet touching the cold, sterile floor. The room felt too quiet, too empty. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning system, the faint electronic buzz of the lights overhead, but everything else felt distant, almost unreal. The walls were white, unremarkable, just another part of the sanitized, forgotten world I had been thrust into. The flickering fluorescent lights above hummed softly, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the shadows of the corner of the room. I froze. The corner was empty, just the bare wall and a shadow too deep to be real. I shook my head, willing myself to focus. "It's just the lights," I told myself. "The lights are flickering." But the sensation lingered. Something in the back of my mind, a gnawing feeling as though I was being watched. It wasn't paranoia. It was something worse. It was knowing that I wasn't alone in this space. I reached for the desk, my fingers grazing the cold surface, the sterile edge of the desk cutting through my thoughts. My eyes landed on the clock, its digital numbers glowing in the dim light. 12:12. I had no memory of how much time had passed since the operation, since the mission had ended. Or had it ended? I couldn't be sure anymore. Something was off about the time. It didn't feel right. My fingers brushed against the desk, my mind racing. Something was wrong. It wasn't the clock, or the lights, or the walls. It was me. It was everything. The air tasted metallic again, like blood or iron, and it was thick, suffocating. I stood moving toward the window, pulling back the curtain to look outside. But what I saw, it was wrong. The landscape was wrong. The city, the world beyond the glass, looked like it had been altered, painted over with colors that were too bright, too unnatural. The buildings stood in impossible alignment, casting shadows that fell at angles they should not have. The sky was a sickly shade of purple, the air tinted with a haze that felt as though it was breathing with me, suffocating me. I staggered back, my breath coming in sharp gasps. My hands were shaking, my mind spiraling out of control. The world beyond the window was alien. This wasn't the world I knew. I wasn't where I was supposed to be. I wasn't who I was supposed to be. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a certainty. I turned sharply, expecting someone to be behind me, but the room was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that I was not alone, that something else was in this place with me, moving just beyond the corners of my vision, watching, waiting. I turned to the desk, trying to regain some semblance of control, but the computer screen had already turned on, the digital letters blinking in a pattern that made no sense. I couldn't understand the language, the symbols that flashed across the screen. They were like the symbols I had seen in the facility, glowing, alive, shifting, speaking to me in a language I could feel but not comprehend. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through my body, through my mind, until it felt like I was becoming the sound. No. I slammed my hands against the desk, my chest heaving. This couldn't be real. It's not real. But the symbols remained, the hum remained, and the weight of it, the pressure in my chest, would not let go. I reached for the door, desperate to escape this suffocating room, but before I could turn the handle, I froze. Heavy footsteps echoed outside the door, too heavy for human feet. They were slow, deliberate, the sound resonating through the floor, vibrating up into my bones. They were getting closer. I pressed my back against the wall, holding my breath, waiting for the footsteps to stop. But they didn't. They kept coming. Closer and closer. The door handle turned. I froze again, my heart pounding, but the door didn't open. The sound of the footsteps stopped abruptly, just outside the door. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. But then, as if it were mocking my fear, the door creaked open slowly, just a crack. And through the thin gap, I could see nothing but darkness. The lights above flickered once more, casting strange shadows across the floor. The shadows seemed to twitch, shift, as if something was moving in the dark. The edges of reality began to twist again, bending in impossible directions. The shapes in the shadows grew taller, longer, too long. They stretched out from the walls, from the ceiling, their forms becoming jagged and indistinct. And then I heard it. The low whisper, soft but clear. The sound of my name. Cohen. It was not my voice. It was not anyone's voice. I closed my eyes, but when I opened them again, the shadows were gone. The door was closed. The footsteps had stopped. But in the back of my mind, I knew. It was still here. Whatever it was, whatever had waited for us in the facility, was still waiting. Watching. It didn't need to destroy us. It didn't need to chase us. It could wait. And that was the most terrifying part.